Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. There's talk that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau may prorogue Parliament so he doesn't have to deal with a potential party revolt. Lethbridge Tory MP Rachel Thomas is demanding the CBC CEO Tait pay taxpayers back thousands of dollars. We will explain why. And there's an organization in Taber which is giving abandoned dogs a second chance at life. BCN's Landon Hickok will have that story.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. With Parliament back this week, the Conservatives are expected to push for documents related to government spending on various green projects. Meanwhile, reports say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will be confronted at his party's caucus on Wednesday over sagging poll numbers and gloomy electoral prospects. Trudeau could sidestep both problems by proroguing Parliament, which would end the session and set the stage for a fresh throne speech. Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas is demanding that the CBC CEO refund taxpayers. Thomas's Tait admitted that she charged taxpayers $6,000, including a $1,000 a night luxury hotel, while attending the Paris Olympics. She says she was there for personal and not work-related reasons. Tait is scheduled to testify at a Commons committee about the $18.4 million in bonuses CBC executives received, even though hundreds of CBC staffers lost their jobs. Now, Thomas added that since Tait took over as CEO of the CBC back in 2018, viewership has been cut in half and has been consistently declining in numbers.
Now, we know that Miss Tait herself received a $60,000 bonus this last summer. $60,000, that's more than the average salary of a Canadian in this country. So for Miss Tait to determine that she's going to slash 600 jobs while still being okay with giving, potentially millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars in bonuses is absolute ludicrous.
The final week of hearings are underway in Ottawa as the federal public inquiry into foreign interference continues. The inquiry will hear from expert panels this week on disinformation, national security, and how to ensure electoral integrity. On Monday, the discussion was differentiating between legitimate diplomatic efforts versus more nefarious interference attempts. The commissioner is tasked with looking at how China, India, and Russia interfered in the last two federal elections. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was one of the final people to testify last week. A spotlight has been cast on foreign countries like China and their reported attempts to interfere with our elections. Fred Bradley, who served from 1995 to 2013 as a parliamentary development advisor in Ukraine and other countries to ensure electoral integrity, he says there are steps Canada can take to protect our elections.
I think the idea of having a foreign registry, I think other countries have it, Great Britain, the United States, Australia, to ensure that these activities, these agents have to register. And maybe our security services need to be perhaps given more resources to protect our electoral systems against this.
Make sure you catch more of this insightful interview with Fred Bradley, former Parliamentary Development Advisor, and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our program. The Canadian Autism Treatment for Medicare Coalition reacted to Ottawa's recent framework for addressing autism spectrum disorder. Now, one of the group's members, who's a parent of an autistic child, says they're extremely disappointed in what the Trudeau government brought forward on September the 26th.
Children with autism are either not getting the treatment they need or not getting enough to be able to develop to their full potential. In 2016, the Liberal Party of Canada held a national policy convention in Winnipeg at which over 2,200 delegates overwhelmingly voted in favor of a resolution calling for Medicare coverage for autism treatment. Unfortunately, the government ignored the resolution despite Prime Minister Justin Trudeau having said, and I quote him, "How we care for the most vulnerable people in our society is very important," unquote. My 12-year-old son, Jacob, is one of those children severely affected by autism who had to wait an excessive period of time to get treatment from the Ministry of Social Services. He has never received the amount that could have benefited him the most, but only a mere fraction.
Well, it looks like we may have to wait a little while longer to see the final results of the provincial election in British Columbia. The BC Conservatives and NDP are in a dead heat. The NDP, led by David Eby, were leading or elected in 46 seats, and the Conservatives, led by John Rustad, have 45 seats. The Greens won just 2 seats. 47 seats are required to form a majority government. The recounts taking place in 2 of the ridings, which are Surrey City Centre and Wantafuka-Malahat. Elections BC says the winners of those recounts, along with the final overall count, will take place between October the 26th and 28th. By the way, voter turnout was 57.41%, or just over 2 million votes cast, which was the most ever for a provincial election in British Columbia. Communities in BC's south coast are mopping up after heavy rain over the weekend brought warnings and flood watches that have since been lifted. All flood watches and advisories are no longer in effect along the province's coast, including Vancouver Island and the Lower Mainland. The District of North Vancouver, however, has declared a state of local emergency with residents of 6 Deep Cove homes ordered to evacuate. The district says the evacuation orders were needed due to the discovery of potential failure of private infrastructure. Police in Coquitlam, BC, meanwhile, say a 57-year-old woman whose home was swept away by a mudslide during the weekend storm has since been found dead. The woman's family has been notified. Well, here in southwestern Alberta, we saw periods of rain mixed with snow on Monday. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early peek of the forecast. Jeanette, the moisture, however, appears to be short-lived.
Well, Hal, we started out with some periods of rain and then some periods of rain with snow, and then when it switched to full-on snow, that should only last until tonight. So we're looking at about 3 o'clock in the morning. That's when that should stop, and then overnight things are going to start to clear up. By the morning, we're going to see the sunshine again. However, as we are heading out the door on Tuesday morning, expect some chilly temperatures. We're looking at the low minuses for temperature there, so maybe grab some heavier clothes. It's going to feel more like winter. We might even have to brush off our cars with that light dusting happening overnight. But the good news is that it should climb to 9 degrees by tomorrow, and that should be the last of the snow. So for the rest of the week, it should melt because we're going to be seeing some double digits again real soon, and I'll be back later in the show to give you more details about that.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. So what is next for Israel since the Israel Defense Forces eliminated Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader who was the mastermind behind the October 7th attacks? According to TBN Israel correspondent Yair Pinto, the terrorist group Hamas is in disarray in the northern part of Gaza as it searches for a new leader. Pinto also says there was an assassination attempt on Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
For now, we can say that Hamas is crumbling in the northern Gaza city of Jabalia, while Hamas has published another big lie about the supposed massacre of civilians in the Gaza Strip. But their lies was soon revealed. The other big story today is the attempted assassination of Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, which came in the form of a drone strike launched by Hezbollah in Lebanon and aimed at his private residence in the coastal city of Caesarea. 3 drones were fired at Netanyahu's residence, with 2 big intercepted and 1 hitting a house in the same neighborhood but missing its target. There was no alarm sounded to give people time to get into shelters, and an investigation into this latest failure in the defense system is currently underway.
Supporters of Donald Trump gathered for a giant rally in Butler, Pennsylvania to talk about why they support the former president leading up to the federal election next month. They say Trump supporters are everyday Americans concerned with the economy, inflation, and the future of their country.
I think it's people that just want the best for the economy. They want the best for the United States. They don't want wars. They want peace, affordability, living. Everything is just so hard now. Life is so much more difficult. And honestly, it's a little bit of everyone. It's all different races. It's all different people coming from different backgrounds. And it's just a mix of a little bit of everyone that just feels the same way I do. He doesn't have to be doing this. He gave up his luxury lifestyle, gave up everything, got his name trashed, was losing millions and billions of dollars. And he's still standing here supporting for what he believes in because he knows America deserves better.
I see the middle class as me, and I know that I am having a hard time making it with all the insurances high, all the food, taxes, they're off the roof. We need to save our country.
Yeah, the U.S. federal election is just weeks away now. Will Donald Trump return to the White House, Or will the United States see its first female president in Kamala Harris? U.S. political reporter Lisa Daftari has the latest on what the polls are saying.
We are seeing the polls shift a bit, and a lot of news outlets are now reporting neck and neck. A lot of them are reporting that Trump is ahead in battleground states. And up to now, we had heard that Kamala actually has an edge over Trump. What I did read somewhere is that among certain demographics, ever since Kamala started doing her sit-down interviews a bit more, she's not doing too many, but ever since she started doing a bit more of them, she has dropped in the polls a bit.
Lisa Daftari will have more on the upcoming U.S. presidential election, along with more details on Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. That's coming up later in our program. The Alberta government announced that it will be providing $112 million for 250 interim housing units for the residents of Jasper. A wildfire back in July, you may remember, wiped out about a third of the town, including 800 housing units and many hotels.
These are not temporary structures or camps. These will be permanent homes that will be fully serviced and will provide a safe place to call home for displaced Jasperites. Servicing work has already started on these sites to prepare them for homes to be installed. And based on site servicing timelines and available inventory of modular homes in Alberta, we expect that these homes will be available as early as January 2025. Modular homes will be constructed off-site in a controlled environment to allow for all-season construction and accelerated construction schedules. These interim housing units will be provided at market rent, and applications and eligibility details will be released in the short future. We know that time is of the essence and winter weather is upon us, and we will ensure these interim homes are in place as quickly and efficiently as possible by taking advantage of modular technology.
On another note, both the province and Ottawa announced last week that they were putting a combined $5.5 million toward attracting tourists to the Rocky Mountain resort town. Across the world, and especially here in Canada, astronomers and casual viewers alike can view the Orionid meteor shower on Monday night as the Earth travels through the icy debris fields left behind by comets. Phil Langill, the director of the University of Calgary's Rothney Astrophysical Observatory, explains what viewers can expect to see in the night sky.
We're on this gigantic vehicle traveling through space, and what I think of is when you're driving down the highway in a snowstorm at night with your high beams on, you can see these little zips of light passing by the windshield, right? It's exactly the same. The atmosphere is the windshield of the Earth. These little particles are burning up in the atmosphere and they zip past. This one that's coming up now is the radiant is in the constellation of Orion, so this is the Orionid meteor shower. The moon it's a little past full, which is kind of good because it doesn't rise till later, so it's going to stay darker for the early part of the evening. But with regard to when you will see the greatest number, probably, and I'm sorry to say this, it always happens around 2 o'clock in the morning. Why is that? Because that radiant is going to be right in front of your face when Orion rises and is up in the sky, and that's not till like 2 or 3 in the morning.
So be sure to set your alarm clock for 2 or 3 in the morning. By the way, Langill adds that Orionid meteor showers usually occur in the month of October. You know, there's an organization in Taber here in southern Alberta that cares a lot for a number of vulnerable dogs that have been mistreated, abandoned, or neglected. BCN's Landon Hickok stopped by the Lost Paw Society to find out what they do to give man's best friend a second lease on life.
I am outside the Lost Paw Society in Taber, Alberta, and I am about to go inside and meet a couple of our furry friends who are in search of a forever home. And if you're thinking of becoming a future pet owner yourself, here's why you should consider adopting a dog here at the Lost Paw Society. This is Frankie and Clifford. These two dogs have been with the care of Lost Paws while they await a new owner to take them to a new home. Frankie is a lab and bully mix and is described as happy-go-lucky with a balance between laid-back and active, and is a great dog for children. Clifford, an Anatolian Shepherd mix, is 1.5 years old but still weighs 120 pounds. But he is described as very gentle and a great dog for families. He is crate and leash trained and can socialize well with other dogs.
Some of the things that we see when they come in is that they are under-socialized, maybe not used to even being in a home. A lot of them are really scared to even get inside of a home. The other things we see are, I mean, just basic behavioral issues because they're under-socialized. So those are things that we work with here, and we really, you know, try and get them comfortable, try and get them socialized, really just give them time to decompress, and then we can kind of get into the deeper things. And that's how we sort of branch out and find the right homes for them, because every home is not the right fit for every dog. So we find the right people for them.
I mean, we get new dogs probably every week. Yeah. We get new dogs. Mm-hmm.
The Lost Paws Society began operations in 2018 and has helped found homes for hundreds of dogs that were either missing, neglected, or abandoned. The organization consists of 9 board members and around 30 volunteers among paid staff. I was able to take a tour with some of the staff at the facility to get a behind-the-scenes idea of how the facility is run and how they care for the dogs here.
So this is our food storage room. All the food is donated by our local pet store and just people in the community. We're looking pretty good right now. We're pretty full with food, and sometimes when we have too much, we'll donate some to other rescues that are in need. These 6 kennels are on the bylaw side, so this would be for dogs at large, dogs from victim services, those kind of dogs that have owners. We're just looking for the owners. We planted all these trees. They're all memorial trees in memory of loved ones, like mostly animals, some people, or whatever people wanted to put in memory of. We planted some grass this spring, so we're working on developing this into a nice green space for the dogs to play.
And with plenty of volunteers and staff at Lost Paws, there is no shortage of socializing opportunities that the dogs get that helps them bond with other dogs and especially other humans.
People definitely mentioned to us that they can see the quality of care that we have, and people who have adopted our dogs also say the same. I mean, we've had people come from out of province as far as Smithers, BC, to adopt dogs that really aren't the easiest dogs in terms of adopting. I mean, that have behavioral issues, and they're now thriving and just, again, that second shot at life, and they're a dog and they're just, yeah, living life to the fullest.
Thank you very much for you guys' time. I really appreciate that. You guys are helping so many good doggos out over the years, and it's doing such a good work for the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Well, we experienced lots of clouds and a bit of rain mixed with snow today in Lethbridge, but that moisture may not be sticking around. Full weather details are coming up. It was a very gray, overcast, and soggy day here in Lethbridge. We had snow mixed with rain throughout the day. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it doesn't appear, however, as though the moisture will be sticking around very long.
Nope, just tonight, Hal. Those overnight snowflakes should stop, and then we shouldn't see them for a while. And in fact, we are getting ready to get some more double digits for us this week. That should be good. It's way too early for the snow, so let's just get rid of that for now. We're just dealing with it today and tonight, and then by tomorrow morning, like I said before, we are seeing those minus temperatures, but it should climb. By 10 a.m., we should be at 0, and then starting to get into the pluses by the afternoon, looking at a daytime high on Tuesday of 9 degrees. Clear skies, though, for most of the rest of the week there for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then double digits, 11 on Wednesday, 10 Thursday, 8 degrees on Friday, and then Saturday looking like a beautiful day again, 19 for the high, and then 14 on a Sunday. So not a bad weekend ahead of us considering what we're dealing with today. So average high for this time of year, 12 degrees, average low, -2. And on this day, back in 1982, we saw our record high, which was 18 degrees. Record low on this day was happening back in 1986. It was -7. So the sun rose this morning at 8:04, and we're seeing a sunset this evening at 6:27, looking at 10 hours now and 23 minutes of daylight. So days getting rapidly shorter. On the West Coast tomorrow, Victoria seeing a daytime high of 11 degrees, seeing some 60% chance of morning showers. Same thing, Vancouver, looking at morning showers, clearing by noon, high of 12 degrees. Edmonton, sunny tomorrow. tomorrow, but we're looking at still some flurries overnight and then clearing up in the morning. 7 degrees for the high. Calgary also 2 to 4 centimeters of snow tonight, and then into tomorrow starting to see that sunshine again and things clearing up there with a high of 3 degrees. 2 for a high in Saskatoon tomorrow, mix of sun and cloud. Regina seeing a high of 2 degrees. We're seeing the rain clearing up by noon. Also some wind chill in some of those prairie cities as well, especially in the morning. 5 millimeters rather of rain tomorrow in Winnipeg, high of 10 degrees. So nice 2-digit day there in Winnipeg. As we get to the central part of the country, look at these temperatures. High of 23 degrees, and these cities are also seeing high humidexes. So we're seeing humidexes of 26 and 27 in Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. That is the place to be for tomorrow in the country anyways, for sure. Maritimes, we're seeing a high of 16 degrees, clear skies in Fredericton, Halifax, also a high of 19, 12 in Charlottetown, and a high of 11 tomorrow in St. John's with a 60% chance of showers and up to 50K winds. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
Certain frozen waffles are being recalled in Canada due to potential listeria contamination. Treehouse Foods, which is based in Illinois, says the recall affects various brand names including Great Value, No Name, Western Family, and Compliments. The company says the bacteria could cause severe or potentially fatal infections in young kids, seniors, or those with compromised immune systems. Now, as of October the 18th, Treehouse Foods says there have been no reports of illness connected to the recalled frozen waffles. Officials say the recalled products should be tossed away or returned to the place of purchase for a full refund. A complete list of the recalled products can be found on the Treehouse Foods website. The Trans Mountain Oil Pipeline expansion has been operating for nearly 6 months, and thanks to the $34 billion pipeline project, Canada's year-to-date oil production is at an all-time high. It has allowed oil companies to boost their output thanks to the additional shipping capacity it provides. Canadian oil exports to Asia have gone from nothing prior to Trans Mountain entering operation to a monthly average of $325 million since May. But oil shippers are pushing back against the higher fees that the pipeline's Crown Corporation owner wants to charge to cover construction cost overruns. A Simon Fraser University professor says if the oil industry isn't forced to pick up the tab, taxpayers will be left on the hook. A new report by the Business Development Bank of Canada says 75% of business owners say rising costs have really hurt their businesses. The report says while some input prices have come down, the price of energy is expected to remain elevated as extreme weather impacts electricity output, increased demand, and geopolitical situations keep gas prices higher. The report also discusses how business owners adapt to the Zoomer generation, or those born between 1997 and 2012. Apparently, that group is willing to pay a little extra for environmentally friendly clothes, shoes, and accessories compared to other generations, including my own. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 99 points on the day to finish at 24,723. The Dow was down 344 to 42,931. The S&P 500 was down 10 points to 58.53, and the NASDAQ was up 50 points to finish at 18,540. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.34 to $70.56 U.S. per barrel. Natural gas was up 11 cents to $2.37 U.S. Gold was down $1.77 to $27.1944 U.S. an ounce, and silver was up 8 cents to $33.79 U.S. an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.03 per bushel, barley is at $6.07, canola is at $14.03, and corn is at $7.26 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.30 to $183.15. Feeder cattle were down 75 cents to $247.58. Lean hogs December contract was up 50 cents to $78.25, and the Canadian dollar was unchanged over the past 24 hours at $72.30 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, the Alberta government is building 250 units of interim housing for Jasper residents who lost their homes during this past summer's devastating wildfire. Community and Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says the modular housing units will cost the government $112 million, and the first few units will be made available in January. You know, there's word that the terrorist group Hamas may have found a new leader since the killing of Yahya Sinwar, who was the mastermind behind the October 7th attacks in southern Israel. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, will have details for us momentarily. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. Well, it appears as though the terrorist group Hamas is set to name its new leader outside of Gaza following Yahya Sinwar's death. Sinwar, as you may recall, was the architect behind the October 7th terrorist attack in southern Israel, which left around 1,200 people dead. Now, to chat about this in more detail is Lisa Daftari from the Foreign Desk in Los Angeles. She's our foreign affairs expert. Lisa, it appears as though Sinwar's brother Mohammed may become the new leader of Hamas.
It looks like they want to leave him in charge of the entire war, leave him in Gaza, and maybe select a leader from outside of Gaza. And the question is, how long will this guy last for? As you know, Israel in the last couple of weeks has been going, after the heads of these terror organizations, particularly fixated more on Hezbollah. In this case, in Sinwar's case, they weren't really targeting Sinwar, but they had the opportunity. And as a matter of fact, it was a soldier who only had 9 months training. So a newbie took him out because the opportunity was there. And then with DNA testing, they realized they did, in fact, kill Sinwar. It's an interesting year following the October 7th attacks, to follow how Israel basically waiting for the blessings of the West going into Gaza, waiting to go into Gaza, then waiting to go into Rafah. And if you recall President Biden's warnings, Kamala Harris's warnings not to go into Rafah, and then you realize how much was in Rafah and how important this is to defeating this terror cancer that exists surrounding Israel, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the tunnel systems, the weapons, their leaders, also the hostages. Let's talk about the hostages. The fact that in over a year, the hostages have not been returned to Israel. And, it's obviously their duty and their priority in this war to get the hostages back.
And Lisa, the Times of Israel is reporting now that 6 of the hostages killed at the end of August in the Rafah tunnel, allegedly used as human shields by Hamas leader Sinwar, survived mostly on energy bars before they were executed by Hamas. And apparently they were too weak to even be moved with the terrorist leader Sinwar.
Right. So to those who think that these hostages are being wined and dined in the possession of Hamas, obviously that's not true. And also, are we surprised that they used these hostages as human shields? They use their own people also as human shields. I mean, these are the casualties that we see when they are embedding themselves. And when I say they, I say the terrorists are embedding themselves in civilian areas. They're taking the hostages, putting them in civilian areas. Their tunnel systems are in civilian areas or in mosques, in schools where they keep weapons. And this is really the reality of a terror organization. It's crazy how we have to really educate the public as to what a terror organization is, what they're doing, and how they're fixated not just on killing Jews, but really anybody in the West, any Christian, any Jew, any moderate Muslim who does not fold and to vow allegiance to their brand of this bastardized version of radical Islam. And this is exactly what we're seeing. Stories like this proving once again that they take human shields, that they take hostages, that they don't feed them, they don't treat them well. Obviously, that's the definition of a terrorist organization. And why would they take hostages if they didn't mean to intend harm on them, on Israel, and continue this war?
And here on Bridge City News, Lisa, you will rarely hear us refer to Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis as a militant group, but instead we call them out for really what they are, a terrorist organization, each and every one of them.
And thank you for doing that, because not every media organization is doing that right now, and that's a disservice to their audiences.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. You bet. Now, the U.S. is investigating the online publication of classified materials allegedly detailing recent planning by Israel's Air Force and Navy for a potential strike on the Islamic Republic. The FBI is looking into the leak and how the information was obtained.
It's a crazy story, Hal. Imagine Israel having to share its intel, its plans, with its what it perceives as its main ally, its democratic ally in the West, the United States, and then having moles, having these leaks, having spies within the government who are going to leak that information to obviously jeopardize Israel's plans, to help the Islamic Republic, to help the terrorists. I would hope, and this is not something that's being said too often, but I would hope that Israel would be smart enough at this point not to trust all the elements inside the Biden administration and not to share all of its top secrets with this administration. If you recall, Hal, there were members of the Biden cabinet who actually resigned because they were so anti-Israel and so pro-terrorist that they had to resign, and because they weren't happy with the Biden taking, what they perceived as a pro-Israel stance. Now, many of us believe that the Biden administration and now Kamala Harris could do much more for Israel and not tie its hands and not micromanage a war that is against our common enemy. But to them, somebody who is serving the United States, they're so radicalized and brainwashed, they left their positions in government. So we know that these elements exist. And because of that, I would hope that Israel would know better than to share anything with the Biden administration right now. It also speaks to, and I'll be short, it also speaks to the positioning of the Biden administration, and before that, the Obama administration, to appease the Iran regime. So if these attacks are going to be against Iran's regime, whether it's by the Israeli Navy or Air Force, they would like to give them a heads up. Another element, another example of appeasement towards Iran's regime by this administration.
And the Iran regime hosted a number of naval exercises in the Indian Ocean over the weekend, Lisa. They teamed up with warships from both Russia and Oman. How concerned should we be about this here in the West?
You know, it's more flexing, and this is exactly what the Islamic Republic does when they find themselves in a position of perhaps perceived weakness. Remember, all of these hits against Hezbollah are hits against Iran's regime, whether it's against Hamas or against Hezbollah, and of course, assassinating Hania inside Iran. And they know that it's coming. They know that Israel has every reason to target the Islamic Republic. And for the fact that they keep finding these bedfellows, that is very concerning. The part where they team up with elements like China and Russia and now Oman and others. There's North Korea, there's Venezuela, there's many others. We know that in recent weeks, we've seen leaders from Hamas, from Hezbollah go into Iran. We've seen members of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. We've seen in Turkey's Erdogan go into Iran as well. So, it is concerning that they're able to find these bedfellows, who are, I won't call them strange bedfellows, because at this point they're common bedfellows, because they are rogue elements who are just teaming up against the United States. But it only speaks to one thing, and that is weakness, perceived weakness in their foreign policy here in the United States. If there was strength and perceived strength and leadership and exceptionalism coming from the White House and coming from Washington, D.C., you wouldn't see these rogue elements teaming up the way that they have.
Lisa, one of the wars that we've talked about before that Iran is funding, is backing, is obviously the war between Hezbollah and the Israel Defense Forces in Lebanon. What's interesting, though, is that the deputy leader of the terrorist group, Hezbollah, named Qassem, reportedly fled Lebanon for Tehran on October the 5th following escalating tensions with Hezbollah.
Right, and it's funny that he chose to hide out in Iran under the shelter of the Islamic Republic, because that's where we saw Hania assassinated, because there were guards that were compromised, and they were helping the Israelis to find him. So he might suffer a similar fate here. But the point being that, for those who try to create daylight between Islamic Republic, the regime inside Iran, and these terror organizations, they are literally finding haven by the regime and inside Iran. So, it's so lopsided here. Those who, it's the terrorists on one side and those who oppose terrorism on the other side. If you watch the Iranian people over the last 2 years who came out onto the streets in the aftermath of the 22-year-old being killed for her hijab, Mahsa Amini, you saw it wasn't the first time, but it was really the most dramatic, the most, I would say, influential time that the Iranians came out onto the streets and said, we are being led for 45 years now by a terror element, and they are killing us. They are hanging us, and really taking out the eyes of female protesters, or hanging male protesters, or those who post on their Facebook pages or on their Instagrams. And then that same regime funding the protests that we have here on American and Canadian campuses. I mean, it just makes no sense. And Hal, I appreciate you taking the time to have these kinds of conversations and this dialogue to really connect the dots and educate people on what is going on here. You're either with the terrorists, or you're going to do everything in your power to stand against them.
Yeah, it's really important to inform our viewers. Not only informing, but educating at the same time. You bet, Lisa. Now, the IDF says that they're planning to attack a Hezbollah unit in Lebanon that used to pay operatives of the terrorist group to help them buy arms. And Israel has once again issued evacuation warnings for Beirut.
Right. And again, a very important point about them issuing evacuation notices, trying to get civilians out of harm's way. Lebanon is a bit different because the Lebanese people, as much as they are in harm's way, very little support for Hezbollah inside Lebanon. Most Lebanese people, see them as a cancer cell inside Lebanon. They have asked the West for help. There are many Christians living inside Lebanon, a lot of moderate Muslims as well. They have asked the West to base our aid to Lebanon and make it contingent upon the Lebanese army getting Hezbollah out of that country, and they have not succeeded. So, with Israel actually choosing these targets to be very, very focused. Right in here, we see them hitting the financial institutions inside Hezbollah. That's how you dismantle a terror organization. I mean, other than, carpet bombing their area, they're everywhere. They're like cockroaches. They're literally everywhere. And they have taken up areas, important areas near the capital as well, moving upwards from the south of Lebanon. And really, this is how you do it. You take out the most important parts of their terror infrastructure, hoping to dismantle it once and for all.
Lisa, a video that recently went viral at a Kamala Harris rally showed someone yelling, "Jesus is Lord," and Kamala Harris allegedly countering back with, "You're at the wrong rally." Now, I had a look at that, and it looked pretty legit. Something like that really can't sit well with many Christians in the United States.
I actually had a political, which I don't really engage in many of these yesterday, but it's always mind-boggling when you come across anyone of faith, whether they're Jewish or Christian or even Muslim in this case, who don't really agree with her flip-flopping on many, many important issues. By the same token, someone walked into a protest and talked about genocide, Israel committing genocide, and she said something, and I'm not quoting exactly, but something to the effect of there's truth to what he's saying, or there's validity to what he's saying, and I don't know how she said it, but she validated what he said. Look, it's either, you understand that what she stands for, which is not much, but it's more so what she doesn't stand for. And here we are living in really a country that has Judeo-Christian roots, a country that does support Israel, a country that does stand for, really democracy, transparency, a lot of the things that a free press, a lot of the things that she has not stood for. So I know that a lot of people will be voting for her to vote against Donald Trump. But I find it really challenging to believe that people who do have a list of things that are important to them can actually say that she does support those things. We shall see what will happen here, Hal. I mean, I know Election Day is very, very close, but it seems like the polls keep changing every single day. This is very reminiscent of Trump and Hillary. I think it's an interesting juxtaposition, because I think the polls were kind of skewed then, and then we had a surprise. They may be skewed now, but we shall see.
So, Lisa, let's talk about the poll numbers a little bit. Is it too close to call at this point between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris?
I did read somewhere, because we are seeing the polls shift a bit, and a lot of news outlets are now reporting neck and neck. A lot of them are reporting that Trump is ahead in battleground states. And up to now, we had heard that Kamala actually has an edge over Trump. What I did read somewhere is that among certain demographics, ever since Kamala started doing her sit-down interviews a bit more, she's not doing too many, but ever since she started doing a bit more of them, she has dropped in the polls a bit. I know she is looking to gain in a lot of those battleground states, including Pennsylvania and Michigan. I don't know if that's going to happen, particularly in Pennsylvania. That's going to be harder. I think that's going to go to Trump. but anything is possible, Hal, as we have seen.
And you know what's interesting too is Trump is thinking outside of the box when it comes to his campaigning. I saw him at a McDonald's working the drive-through.
You know, that was an interesting touch. I think it was one of the most unique things we have seen a candidate do. Also hitting upon Kamala's claim that she worked at a McDonald's, where he actually is rolling up his sleeves and working at a McDonald's. I think it was nice. I think the people who saw it, and if you saw, there were like miles of people standing outside and kind of, you know, supporting him, cheering him on. It was a good visual, very smart for his team for doing that, and we shall see how it moves the needle. And again, I think he's doing better in the battleground states. I don't know if that's any indication of election day polling, but we shall see.
We shall see indeed. Political reporter and foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari from the Foreign Desk. Thanks so much for joining us today from Los Angeles.
Thank you for having me.
The U.S. presidential election will be here very soon. And of course, here in Canada, we could see a federal election as well, because we currently have a minority government. Increasingly, we are hearing concerns about election integrity and potential election fraud. So joining me today from the Crow's Nest Pass area of Alberta is Fred Bradley. And many of you may remember Fred as the former MLA for Pincher Creek from 1975 through 1993. And he also served from 1995 to 2013 as a parliamentary development advisor in Ukraine, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, which included advising on election integrity. So Fred, great to have you with us today. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Well, thank you very much. Very pleased to join you.
Okay, so Fred, what was your experience like in some of the foreign countries that we mentioned there, and to what degree did they experience attempts to manipulate the elections?
Well, my actual experience was in Ukraine in terms of election monitoring, and I monitored elections in the 1998 parliamentary elections, the 2004 presidential election, and the 2012 parliamentary election. And over the period of time, I saw in my initial experience in 1998, there was certainly a lot of manipulation and fraud at the polling stations. But what I witnessed in 2004 during the presidential election was certainly very eye-opening, because I monitored the three rounds of the presidential election in 2004, and saw many different types of election fraud during that and manipulation of the vote. When we got to the 2012 parliamentary election, it was basically what we would call a fundamentally free and fair election. The processes, the results of the voting were accurate and portrayed the will of the people. But I saw some interesting things in 1998 in terms at polling stations. Obviously, manipulation by administrative resources being used to back the party of power's candidates in elections. Voting irregularities at election polling stations. But 2004 was really the ultimate experience in monitoring pervasive election fraud conducted by the administration of the political party and the administration, presidential administration in Ukraine, or their cohorts, and Russian interference was obviously a hallmark of that. I could go into some detail on that if you wanted me to. But there was things like carousel voting, where buses would roll up and people would come out and go into polling stations and vote, and then go on to another polling station because their names were on multiple lists in multiple different polling stations, and that's how one way of influencing the vote. The other was disappearing ink, where if they knew a polling station was going to vote for an opposition candidate, they would have this disappearing ink pen, and when the ballots went to count, the ballots would not show the mark for the opposition candidate. And then there was actually and the second round experience where the one constituency we were monitored in, that at the end of the day, the polling commission had got so expert in what they were doing was they just reversed the results. So they reported that their favored candidate, which was the Russian-supported candidate, had won the election. They reversed the votes for the Yushchenko, who ultimately won the presidential election, but they just reversed the votes and filed them accordingly and said this was the result of the vote for this election commission in favor of the Yanukovych versus Yushchenko. So it was really a real eye-opener in terms of what can be done. But the use of administrative resources, the election commissions itself, the Central Election Commission, they had 1 million more people vote at the end of the day that than had registered to vote during the election. So they just created all sorts of election. That was absolutely election fraud at a very high scale, which resulted in a third round of voting, the firing of the then Central Election Commission, which had perpetrated the fraud, and then had a fair and free election. The third round was absolutely different. They followed the procedures as laid out by the law, and they didn't have the interference that had taken place in the first election. That's basically the experience that I had witnessed in terms of election fraud.
So corrupt. Now, here in Canada and the US, there's been a lot of attention on foreign interference attempts from nations like China and Russia and Iran, among others. So what methods are hostile nations using to try to sway election results over here?
Well, there's all sorts of
it's gotten more sophisticated, obviously, than the disappearing game, right?
The game has changed incredibly. Social media is a big part of it. Right. Manipulating social media, fake news and propaganda, deep fakes and manipulated media. I mean, they hacking into political parties' campaigns. This has happened in the United States, both currently in terms of Democratic and Republican attacks. They can target voting infrastructure. There's just, there's diplomatic and economic pressures that have been used. They can targeting influence operations, manipulation of traditional media sources with putting in wrong data out there, which is then reported, et cetera. So there's many different ways in which foreign actors can interfere in our elections. And then they have their espionage and covert operations, and they will also exploit any loopholes they see in our electoral processes if they can do that. So there are many different ways in which that foreign interference and manipulation can take place, and both Russia and China have been big actors in that in the United States. Russia more in the United States, China here in Canada, in terms of some of the recent things we've seen.
Do we know, Fred, if any of these efforts have actually changed the outcome of an election?
It's really that is really difficult to determine. I mean, in very close targeted ridings, it may have an influence. I mean, there's been those allegations in Canadian elections, particularly I think in one in Vancouver. They've manipulated political parties. Have they actually affected the results? That's extremely difficult to assess. In a very close election, I mean, how do you influence public opinion? If through social media and influencers, you influence public opinion, how do you measure that? How do you actually show that that's had an effect on the results? So that's one aspect. And recently, I think we've seen in the United States where the Russians have just perfected their manipulation, where they actually are paying domestic social media influencers to put forward their propaganda pieces, which they promoted in RT and other sources. So they're actually paying Americans or Canadians to manipulate what is being the information they want to target to voters in terms of trying to influence an election or public opinion. I mean, if you push certain stories which aren't true or there's partially true and just continue to push that with people generally after many periods of receiving information, they start to, even though they may know something is false, it becomes part of the psyche of what they believe or what they think is true.
Yeah, that's true. What changes do you think the federal government could put in place to make it a lot more difficult for other nations to interfere?
Well, we currently have a royal commission that's looking into that and was going to provide some advice on that. Obviously, whether it's direct foreign influence by embassies or staff of embassies, I think actions need to be taken. I think the idea of having a foreign registry, I think other countries have it, Great Britain, the United States, Australia, to ensure that these activities, these agents have to register. And maybe, and our security services need to be perhaps given more resources to protect our electoral systems against this. Social media, how do you control that? We have the arguments of free speech versus actually putting out misinformation and misfacts. That's very difficult to control. And cybersecurity, I think you have to look at also those aspects. So there's many different ways we can look at it, but it's extremely difficult to in this age and with artificial intelligence and the manipulation that can be done there. I mean, we've seen in the United States where there's fake videos out there now.
That is the scariest thing, like you were saying before. The
of a very prominent musician endorsing one candidate when she's actually come out and endorsed another candidate publicly last night. So,
yeah. Oh, that is the scariest. Do you think that we need stricter voter verification rules, or, as some argue, would that discourage people from voting? Because, you know, you hear stories of like election poll stations where, like, Elections Canada surveyed election officers during the 2019 Canadian federal election, discovered that, what was it, 35% of polling staff sometimes or often encountered individuals asking to vote who were not on the list of electors and who were unable to be registered at the polling station. So should that maybe raise some red flags?
Well, you know, I think we have some very good election processes in Canada. Okay. So what happens at polling stations, and maybe this, you know, we used to have an enumeration list where we hire enumerators to go door to door in the first part of when we had longer election periods. So we decided we had to shorten the election period. There used to be 2 months federal elections because it gave time for hiring enumerators to go door to door to register voters. Those lists would be published. Then people could go to the list and have an opportunity to revise and have their name put on the list. But we don't do that anymore. It's compiled electronically based on provincial records or federal records, and they have a list. That list, so we shortened the election campaign to basically a 1-month campaign. So if your name isn't on the list, you have an opportunity prior to the election to have your name added to the list. And you go, it's usually an electronic process. The day of the election, people will show up, and what we require for verification, even you'll get a polling card, I think, from the federal government. But what we require when you go to vote is to show a photo ID, a government-issued piece of photo ID with your name and address on it, or 2 pieces of ID showing your name and address. And that's when people go to the poll. They expect they can go in and vote. They may not have their ID with them that verifies that. So, and their name may not be on the list. And that's where, that's where the issue comes in. You go to the polling station and you haven't brought your ID with you. And people will say, I'm not on the list, or I can't vote because I don't have my ID. Yeah. So that's pretty strict. I mean, that's pretty strict identification of a voter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Photo ID or 2 pieces of government issued or something, a utility bill that has your name and address that proves that you are a resident in the place in which you are voting. that I think is the cause. But I do think, you know, those requirements are very very stringent to some degree. That you have to have these 2 pieces of ID to prove who you are. So it's very. I don't think you have people voting who aren't eligible to vote. It's people who may be disqualified because they can't prove their residency. Does that change the results of an election? I think those. And the other thing, if you don't have that information, if you have a voter, a friend, or someone goes with you who lives in the, you sign a sworn statement that I live in such and such a address, and you have a neighbor or a friend who comes and signs a sworn statement, yes, I know this person, I verify that they live at this address, they will put you on the list. So I mean, that would be access to voting. Do all citizens have credible access to voting? And we have all sorts of procedures for absentee voting if you're out of the country, or if you are in a nursing home, or some incapacitated voting opportunities for people.
Right. Oh gosh, it looks like we're out of time here, but Fred, we appreciate you coming on today and sharing your knowledge with us, especially from the voting interference that you experienced in those other countries. So fascinating.
Well, it was certainly a fascinating experience for me, and a very interesting period of time in my life.
Absolutely. Fred Bradley is the former Alberta MLA and an overseas parliamentary development advisor. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.